Hello and welcome to the Render Bar. I'm Steve Jacks,
I'm Erika Robbins.
I'm Richard Sanchez.
and we are three visual effects editors working in film and television. We all have a different story to tell about how we came up through the film industry, and we're here to share our experiences. Each episode will take a deep dive into our past to share stories about how we've navigated the cutting room to find a better balance in the workplace. The ups, the downs, and the in-betweens. And we'll have some great guests to share their stories too. It's going to be a fun time, so pull up a seat to the Render Bar. Hey guys, how's it going today?
Hello.
Hey, so today's episode is actually going to be a pretty interesting one. We're going to go back to the beginning. What do you think about that?
Are we going back to the future?
We're back to the past.
Oh, back to the past. Okay.
Back to the past. That's the sequel they need to make.
That's the prequel trilogy. Yeah.
Forward to the past. Yes. So today I want to ask you guys, kind of basically how you all got started, how we all kind of got into what made us be who we are and where we are today. Let's go in that direction. So do you guys have like Erika, do you have a kickoff point from when you started working in film, like anything that kind of got you excited to work in the film industry?
I mean, honestly, I think it's just a thing that I've always been kind of interested. Like when I was a little kid, my dad and I would make like little stop motion videos and things like that. And I've just always been I was like super into Disney animation as a kid. And like I really liked Gremlins, and I really liked like stop motion animated films. And so I think it's just something that I've always been really into. So it just kind of came naturally, I guess. When I went to college, like I ended up majoring in film, and then I came out here and went to film school. So it's just in my blood, maybe.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you ever make any stop motion films on your own?
Not anything crazy. I think I made some like little short films just messing around, but like
that's
nothing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Made me think you'd have a lot of fun at Robot Chicken with it.
Well, I did do, when I was in graduate school for one of my short films that you have to make, I did a film with puppets. And I made my puppets from scratch.
Like puppets?
Like little rod puppets?
Muppet style?
Yeah, like little rod puppets. So like their mouths moved, and then I had little rods for their arms.
That's awesome.
They were very, very basic, but...
That's pretty creative, though. When you're starting out, I remember in some film school when one student did a film using puppets. It was like it blew us all away that they had the creativity to go there in their choice of film they wanted to tell. Richard, what about you?
It opens up character options.
Yes, it's true.
For me, it was interesting because I didn't go to film school. I actually studied to be an actor. Really wanted to do that, and it was in my last quarter at UC Irvine that I just took an editing class. It was Final Cut Pro 2, and sitting down with it in the first week, I just had decided that's all I wanted to do. I was basically ready to kind of put my major aside and pursue this. And my first kickoff point was it was through that old website, entertainmentcareers.net. I found a job working for this company that did video for cell phone long before the iPhone existed. So it was very primitive. If you had a really good phone, you could watch 10 frames a second, and that was the Cadillac of the mobile viewing experience. But it was one of those things where, because of the accessibility of cameras like the Panasonic DVX100, you had these cinematic style cameras and equipment. And so I did a lot of field shooting, and it was great. But also at a certain point, I realized, well, I want to edit, and I've been asking, and I've kind of fallen into camera work. So, well, if I want to edit, I might need to take things into my own hands. So actually, I left that job when an opportunity to work somewhere else came up, because it was like, well, I want to edit, I'm not getting that shot. So, I got to make that happen.
Cool. And was this stuff you were doing while you didn't go to film school, but you were doing this while you were in college?
This was after I graduated.
Oh, okay.
So while I was in college, for most of my college experience, I was pursuing acting. So I was going on auditions. I did one commercial where you might have seen me get turned into a chicken in a PlayStation commercial, but that was the height of my acting career.
We got to get that video in the bio. We got to get that link. What was the commercial for?
It was for Ratchet and Clank. It was a
Ratchet and
PlayStation
Clank.
game. So I got to get turned into a chicken. That
So
was
what pushed you from acting into doing editing?
Yeah, I was really into zombie movies at the time. Little did I know that zombie movies would become everywhere some 15 years later. But I had got this DVD set. It was the original Dawn of the Dead that had both the European version and the American version. They were basically the exact same footage edited completely differently for different markets, and that was kind of the moment of, oh my gosh, you can make completely different movies, by these editorial decisions. And that was, sort of that was the eureka moment. And there was, that between that and the Final Cut Pro class, it was just this, it was this confluence of art and technology that was, I always loved computers, and it's like, I get to work with computers all day, I get to work on movies. That sounds amazing. That's perfect.
That's awesome. Yeah, Eric, I saw you shaking you're nodding your head, agreeing with him on some of that. You had that same experience?
Yeah. Yeah. I honestly, when I first went to film school, I was more interested in, because I do a lot of photography as a hobby. And so I was interested in cinematography. And then when I started cutting together my own projects, I started to realize, like, oh, there's like a lot of fun to be had here in terms of like retelling the story through editing.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you guys on that one completely. I mean, my story just from going to the movies a lot with my dad and my family, as a kid in high school and like middle school, that just being surrounding myself in film is what got me to like see that this was well, not only just entertainment but fun to just see on the big screen. And I always point back to like two movies that struck me when I was young. Was like watching Titanic for the first time, and then The Matrix. Titanic being that like what you could see on screen be so epic and so big, and be in awe of like the bigness of it. Seeing the water rushing in and all that stuff, and just like, I don't understand how they film this, it feels like magic, right? And then The Matrix, seeing this, like how special effects, like visual effects that were so obviously visual effects, be used in such a way to tell a really cool story. So to me it was like that, and then that got me into filming my own little fight scenes in my backyard with my friends, adding little lightsaber effects, and then from there creating like stories through it. And then to agree with what you guys were saying, is that I found myself just locked in my parents' basement in the laundry room, was where I had gave me a little office with my compact computer running Pinnacle Studio. I think it was like Pinnacle Systems
Yes.
TV editor. And I'm editing my short film with all these little lightsaber effects I have to do in Photoshop, frame by frame by frame. And I just started to like get into that and find that this was fun, just being locked in my basement and just figuring this out all night long. And yeah, and then going to film school. That was kind of like an obvious for me and everyone who knew me, like, you're going to film school, right? I was like, yeah. And so that's what got me into it for sure.
There was something about that CompUSA system, the Pinnacle system, where like you sit down and you go, like, as something as basic as a cross dissolve, like, ooh, I did that.
Yeah. And the different transitions, and just like Erica, you were saying, like, oh, I can put music here, and it makes me feel this, and that's cool, and that's interesting. And to me it was a lot of like, well, I just was, everybody knew me as the kid who saw movies all the time. Like, they would ask me, what's out right now, what do you like? Because I just went to the movies like 3 times a week, maybe more. And that idea of just like, oh, for me it was a lot of, can I replicate what I see? I remember trying to replicate credits, a crawl, and thinking, oh, well, these are all the names. I just wrote them, all the names, all the credits down from a movie I enjoyed, and then just replicated it. And that was my way to teach myself before film school, was just, can I replicate what I see and make it work? And then, sometimes it did and sometimes it didn't, but that was my thing. Yeah, yeah.
It's funny that the two film examples you chose too, in that both were such visual effects pieces for such distinct different reasons. One trying to recreate something that is the real world, but obviously we weren't there during the actual Titanic crash. So you're trying to be faithful to the real world with the real sense of physics and geometry, and then you have something so high stylized as the Matrix, which I think is like it's the beauty of how big the world is too. Is
Hmm.
do you go into the the tech wonderland of that, or keep it within our own world? But something so exciting about that,
Yeah, yeah. So tell me about Richard. Tell me about like your first job in the industry.
So, what I consider to be my first real job in the industry was it was working in unscripted. It was a show for the History Channel called UFO Hunters, which at the time it was just, to me, it was the coolest thing that I was gonna have my hand on something that was gonna go on TV. And being a kid of the the 80s and early 90s, X Files was a big part of my life. So anything UFOs, I was all over. So working on a show about UFOs, and it was one of those things. It also illuminated this sense in that was I ready for that transition? If I knew what was going to be expected of me, uh, the answer is probably no. But I think ignorance may have been a bit of a blessing in disguise to me, just in the sense of I said, I can do that without even knowing totally what an assistant editor did. But I knew enough about digitizing stuff, using mini DV tape decks, that when they sat me down with a VTR we shot on DVC Pro HD, it made sense to go, oh, the tape goes in here and it goes from HD to SD, and then I'm going to hand it off to my editor. I didn't even fully understand what grouping meant, but it was enough to talk to the more senior assistant editor and say, oh, this is what I need to do. And it was a night job. So, working 7 p.m. to, 7 a.m. or later sometimes. It was a lot of work, but it was, that's definitely what I consider like the show that I cut my teeth on.
What was the name of that again?
UFO Hunters.
UFO Hunters. Where did you? Where is it a show? Was it like a reality show?
It was an unscripted show for the History Channel, which at the time I remember thinking, wait, history? I guess in a loose grasp of history, but it was,
Yeah,
we have Roswell, which was in history, so cool. But
sure.
I
That's a
didn't care. I
stretch.
was I was over the moon to be on something again, to be on something that was going to be on TV, to be, there was something exciting to say, like History Channel, and people know what that is, as opposed to I did a film. Is it going to be showing anywhere? No.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
yeah,
It's
yeah. And that was like your first thing in the industry right away, working night shift as an assistant editor.
hmm
That's cool. That's cool.
at a time when I was still a little intimidated by Avid. So I knew Final Cut, so that was kind of good enough, And it was also at a time where finding really solid Final Cut assistant editors was kind of a difficult thing. You had a lot of people who were well experienced in Avid and thought that they would transition that experience directly over into Final Cut, and some things transitioned well and some things really didn't. And so it was valuable, at least at the time, that I was kind of fresh and willing to stay up late and go, oh, how do I do that? And that that was my that was a valuable time for me coming into it from that angle.
That's cool. And so you uh, were teaching yourself Final Cut already. You
hmm
weren't in the film industry. You were acting, and you just connected with the right people to get this job.
hmm In
That's
fact,
cool.
in perhaps the silliest way possible, or rather the most cliche sounding way possible, because I was working for that company doing videos for cell phones, and I was literally standing on the corner of Cherokee and Hollywood Boulevard. That's how cliche this story sounds. And a friend from high school walks down the street, and I say, "Hey, how you doing?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm working for a reality company right here." That's so cool. I want to do that. He goes, well, I know someone who needs someone, and you should give them my number, and
I know a guy
which
who knows a guy who needs someone.
it is kind of the thing is, it is for anyone who says, I don't want to move to LA. I empathize with that, especially as expensive as LA is, but sometimes you got to go where the work is, and you kind of never know where things will come at you.
And were you already here in for school? Or you're from here. You're from LA. that's right.
I had the fortune of living in LA, so
Yeah.
I will not pretend to really know the hardship of moving to a city with no friends and no prospects and just a sense of gumption, like I'm going to do this. So I find that very admirable, because that wasn't my story, and I recognize that that is very much my privilege.
I'd like to use gumption in a sentence.
I
I
know,
like
and
to
I think
think that
that
I like to
took us
think that we
back to
all
the
have.
1920s. Yeah,
I
we
like to
rolled
think
up
that
our sleeves. We
I
had
like to think,
gumption.
yeah, exactly. I like to think that we all have gumption in this room right now. So, Erica, what about you?
Well, going off of what Rich was just saying about coming out here where the work is, I came out here for film school, and I actually got my first job through somebody that I met in film school. He had done an internship on a Paramount movie, and one of the AEs he'd worked with went on to another movie and was looking for a PA, and he recommended me. So I ended up, like, my first real job in the industry was working as a post PA for a Paramount film. It was a film called Labor Day, which had Kate Winslet and Josh Brolin, and it was just like, yeah, kind of like the same thing. Like, it was kind of just this magical experience to like work in a real post-production office on a real movie and get to watch dailies and just see actual movie stars. Like, it
Hmm.
was pretty amazing. Like, even though I'd gone to film school, and I knew how to use an Avid and I knew the basics of like what went into editing, it's still a very different experience to actually get to see a real film come together. So that was just like such a really cool experience. And through that, I met a bunch of people like the editor and some AEs that I worked with that I still keep in touch with and have worked with since. And, I kind of, especially the editor, Dana, she really kind of took me under her wing and moved me up. And that's really just kind of the start of how my career took off, was from there.
And is that the same Dana we know?
Yes, it
Yes,
is the
Dana
very same.
Glauberman. Yeah, she's fantastic, and we have
She's
been
the
working with
best.
her on the Mandalorian and Ahsoka shows. That's cool. So you made a connection so early on, like right away, with someone that you're
Yeah.
still working with. That's really great. That's great.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, was your step in through film school as well?
It was. It was. I say I owe my entire career to an email from during film school. So I went to focused in editing and sound design, and then I had in my editing course, my professor said she received an email from an assistant editor that was in town shooting a small independent film, and they needed an editing intern. And so I jumped on the opportunity and said yes. And it was like my last. It was like my last semester of school. Yeah, it was my last semester of school, and I was just taking some class I didn't really enjoy, but I could get internship credit for, so I could, if I got the internship, I'd get credit for school. So I reached out and the editor or the assistant editor of this film, it was called The Mysteries of Pittsburgh. It sounds like just some weird movie, never heard of, but it had Ben Foster. Is it Ben Foster? Or his brother. It wasn't Ben Foster. It was his brother, the other Foster. I don't remember his name now. But Sienna Miller and uh, Peter Skarsgård. Yeah. And it was this little movie based on a book, and they were shooting in Pittsburgh, and they were doing post. They were shooting and doing some of post in Pittsburgh, and the assistant editor was Ian Bloom, and he was a New York guy. And so he called me up, and we had a great conversation. You could tell I was like eager and hungry to get to work, and I landed that internship. And it was the same feeling as Erika said, where you walk in the room, and everything you think you know about making movies suddenly changes, and you're like, oh, this is real. Like there's a giant plasma screen that the editor has a whole editing bay, and mind you, we were in the hotel in downtown Pittsburgh. It's not a fancy editing suite. It's just a hotel because I went to school in downtown Pittsburgh, Point Park University, and you walk in and it just feels like, oh, this is a real thing. People are really, production office is here, editing is here, locations is here, like everything is happening right in the same little like office suite. And it hit me that this is the real thing. What have I been doing for 4 years in film school? Like, this is what I need. And then you're there and being able to just, I'm doing paperwork, doing this, doing the script binder, the line script and things like that, making my, copying pages, hole punching, all that dumb stuff. But I had the chance to kind of do some, do some stuff here and there to kind of help them out and learn the Avid a little bit on my downtime, and kind of get some feet wet and, kind of understanding how the process works. They ultimately had to leave to go back to LA, and then I was left without finishing the job with them. And I tried in my brain to figure out how I could move to California, and I was like 21, 22, maybe 21. No, 22, maybe. I don't remember how old I was, but I didn't know anybody out here to make it work, so I couldn't do that. But, one internship led to another internship in Pittsburgh. And then ultimately my choice was to either go to New York or like stay in Pittsburgh. And to me, like jumping into post was took a little longer than you guys, because if I had made a jump to New York or LA right away, maybe I would have had that opportunity like you did. But that internship, I had to wait a few years before that internship really paid off, because that assistant editor, Ian, it wasn't until a couple years later when I finally moved to New York and had already been working some other jobs like accounting. I fell into the accounting department on film production in Pittsburgh and kind of rode that to Philadelphia, passing out paychecks to back to New York, working on some network television shows in accounting. And I knew that I didn't want to move up in accounting, but so I did keep telling, like, if you know anybody in editing, let me know. I want to jump over. And finally, this assistant editor, Ian, who I've been in touch with for years, says, I can bring you on. We can interview you for this film. It's called Going the Distance. It was a Justin Long, Drew Barrymore comedy. And that's the one that got me in as a post PA. And that was like 2009, I think, 2008. And that's when I was, kind of, then it was, oh, I'm here every day. I have a role. I'm post PA, still just getting coffees and stuff, but it was a paid job in editing. And that's when it was kind of started to tumble into a real career.
Well, and at risk of misrepresenting, or rather, just to clarify, because it sounded like you mentioned that that we came into it rather quickly. The one thing I always stress upon people is there is no real timeline to this, because the fact of the matter is, after college, between having just gotten my degree in acting, which had nothing to do with editing. I mean, of course, judging performance, sure, there's cases to be made for that. But pursuing editing, I actually worked at Starbucks for 4 years out of college, and so actually my integration into the field was around the same time you did. It was around 2008, after scouring all the websites. And the websites are difficult because I would not diminish what they bring to people, because they are jobs. They are often low paying jobs. And as I'm sure the two of you well understand too, is the best jobs are never on websites. They're always word of mouth. So by the time anything makes it to a website, it's kind of, it's picked over. It's what's left,
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, by throwing out enough resumes, you get on one of those gigs and you go, okay, well, it's a chance to meet people, and so nowadays you have sites like Staff Me Up, which didn't really exist when I was getting started, and then I think entertainmentcareers.net still exists.
I remember that one. Yeah.
Yeah. And now you have groups like, there's Facebook groups like I Need an Editor, where people just reach out. And it's one of those things, again, you always take it with a grain of salt, because there are jobs that have varying degrees of pay. Sometimes it's insulting or even illegal. But also, when you don't have experience, that's the kind of experience you need.
When you're young, you're just trying to get work,
Mm-hmm.
Erika, have you experienced any frustrations when you were first starting out, like work wise, like getting another job, or maybe not sure if this is where you really wanted to be or do for your future goals?
Oh, I mean, sure. I think it'd be crazy to say I didn't have any frustrations. I mean, I guess the biggest one for me, and it kind of coincided with like a family thing that was going on at the time, but there was definitely a point early in my career where things kind of fizzled out for a little while, and I had a hard time finding my next gig, which is another thing. It's easy to make it sound like, oh, I went from this to this to this to this, and but there are definitely, like, especially early on, like gaps between the shows I was doing, where before you really know a lot of people, you can kind of struggle to find work. Because even the people I'd worked with on the first couple of shows, they, sometimes they would take breaks between the shows they were doing, and I was, making a PA salary. So I really kind of needed to keep finding stuff to do. So I did a couple things in between shows early on where I was working on like, I think it was like a PBS thing, just like some little documentary shorts and just whatever random things I could find. And so there were definitely frustrations and just kind of like sometimes early on just trying to figure out what my next thing was and just feeling like I needed to meet more people and, get to the point where I'm at now, where I feel pretty good about my network being big enough that I can find stuff much more easily than I could back then.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that experience led me into VFX editing, because after that really long period where I had a hard time finding my next job, I ended up hearing about a VFX assistant editor position on the first season of Supergirl. And so I did that, not thinking, because I dabbled in VFX. Like I knew how to use After Effects, and I definitely done some like temps and stuff as an AE and an apprentice on earlier shows, but wasn't really something that I ever thought about doing by itself. And but I needed work, so I took it, and it ended up kind of launching my career. So
that's great.
Yeah, I think if you kind of just try to, I guess, take those frustrations and try to make them into like, try to work with them, and just it's like yeah, we all experience frustrations, but to just try to kind of be like, okay, why am I frustrated? Like, what can I do about it? And move forward from it. And I feel like eventually you figure out how to make something work out, hopefully.
Yeah,
So,
right. I mean, that's a great lesson. Just kind of like sticking with it.
Just keep at it. Yeah,
Keep at it.
exactly.
I know I was just thinking about it. I probably had about 4 years where I was kind of felt stuck in accounting. But that was my foot in the door. At the time, I was an intern, and I found, I was an intern at one thing to another, and then they're like, "Hey, can you help us unload boxes?" I said yes as a PA, and then they said that their assistant or their accounting clerk was never just, I guess, just bailed on the job. And the accountants that I had met while I'm unloading boxes, they liked me, and they said, "Hey, we like you. Do you want a job?" I said, "Well, job or versus no job? Yes, I'll take the job." And that was like my foot in the door, because in my head, it was, rather than, I knew I wanted to be an editor, but I didn't really know how to get there exactly. So in my head, I'm thinking, well, I can get my foot in the door here. It's in production. Let's see where that goes. And I rode that as far as I could. But there were points, even as a post PA, where, I'm not making a lot of money. I'm not in the union. I don't know what the next phase is to even jump into assistant editing. And talking to an assistant editor I was working with on this film called The Next 3 Days. It was a Russell Crowe action movie they shot in Pittsburgh, and I was a post PA. And I remember like getting really frustrated, like, should I bail on this thing? Should I just go and just try to edit my own films or something, or not work my way up the ladder in the film industry, but do it my own way? And they, kind of telling me like, just stick with it. It's what you want to do. You got to get in the union. Just kind of work your way toward that, And so I had that frustration of like, I didn't know, I had no plan B except for to continue what I was doing, but I didn't know how to get into the cutting room exactly as an assistant. And then, so it wasn't until kind of being able to work on some low budget films in New York as an assistant that I started to get cut my teeth on low budget shows where you weren't doing too much, but you're doing enough to kind of get a credit, and then it wasn't really like Rich, you said, working the night shift. I'd say that was a somewhat of a, I don't want to call working the night shift a break for me, but realizing that there was even a night shift position available on reality TV. Because in my head, I wasn't going to do reality, is what a lot of people say. But then there's this whole world of jobs. And then I was at a place of like, I couldn't afford my rent in New York, and I had to bail. I had to go back to Pittsburgh and stay with my parents for a while. And that's when I found this night shift that got me back to New York. And I said, okay, I'm going to do it right, figure this out so I don't have to go back home again financially, make it work, get those editing jobs, and I did, and it kind of that propelled into more work. Like Erika said, where you start to people know your name, and you're starting to get the assistant jobs, and that was a frustrating time. But you kind of just have to like keep remembering what your bigger goal is, and then you can kind of stick through it.
You know, it's funny. The biggest form of frustration that I had early on was learning how insular all of the worlds of editing are, in that I didn't realize that if you come to be in unscripted, sometimes it can be very difficult to transition over into scripted television, and likewise transitioning from television to features can also be very difficult because people have all sorts of stigmas in all directions, really, and it took a lot of time to break those barriers, and also learning that all of those stigmas were very much untrue. You know, it always felt like the general perception of unscripted is that unscripted is bottom feeders, and then I noticed that there was a stigma against people working in scripted, being that, oh, it's paint by numbers, which after I started working in scripted I learned that is very much not true. And then when I wanted to work in features, which that took me a really long time to kind of break that bubble and get into that world, there was always this perception that, oh, feature editors are too slow, they can't keep up with television, you know. And that's also one of those things where some people edit fast, some people edit slow, but I don't think that's just a blanket statement that is accurate about this group of editors in general, you know. And then that argument also gets more complex in that, well, are very methodical, well considered edits that don't require a lot of nickel and diming and, you know, nudging to get right, you know. I mean, maybe it's slow, but if you don't change it, it seems like you save time in the long run. But I found trying to traverse those worlds was very difficult. And so, yeah, I often get very frustrated with the, oh, you don't know scripted. Oh, you don't know this, you know. And
Yeah.
on one hand, I get the concern, because I think when you get a pool of ambitious people who step in, they all will always answer the question the same way of how are you going to deal with this thing you've never done? And everyone says, I'm smart, I'll figure it out. And most people are and do, but not everyone does. And I think for a hiring party that's ever been in the position who said, I took a risk on this person and they didn't cut the mustard and it really put us in a bad situation, I get how they'd be apprehensive. So it does create all the more need to really stick it out. But I think both of you have said it already, is just the importance of just sticking it out. And there's no two ways about it. It's an awful feeling when you're young and hungry and you want to be a part of something exciting, and you know you have a lot to bring, and you do have to a large part, kind of wait it out, and your time will come. But as you both have experienced, as have I, is you wait it out, you be modest, and it will come.
Yeah.
There's no one answer, no one timeline, but
Yeah, well, and it's also really frustrating. I don't know if you guys ever experienced this, but just when I was going through those periods, I would talk to people and ask for advice, and they would always say to me, "Oh, just keep doing what you're doing. You're doing the right thing." And it just was like so frustrating.
it doesn't
So
feel like the
vague.
right thing.
But
Yeah.
it's true. Yeah. So, but when you're just waiting and
Yeah.
trying to wait
But,
it out, it's like,
but
when
like
is it going to pay off?
but like specifically, what should I do?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, tell me all the steps.
And there's something to be said too about, you know, coming to a sense of peace with the fact that not every project you work on is going to be extremely fulfilling, and that simply is what it is. But
Hmm.
you know, I think there's something to be said about, sometimes there's nothing wrong with taking a job that perhaps you're not enthused about, but you're still going to bring everything you can to it, and it's a job, it's going to pay the bills, and you keep on looking forward to that job that does fulfill you. And I think you also run into, one, sometimes you don't even realize how fulfilling a job might be. It doesn't appear that way, and then you get on it and it turns out to be great. Or you get that dream job opportunity after you've waited for so long, and there's that sense of, I've arrived. Okay, now let's make sure that, you know, I've earned this spot, and I'm gonna do it. But There's, it's easy. I think I always found that it's almost like the bicycle thief effect, when you're working on something that doesn't fulfill you. It always seems like all these great films come out that seem so amazing, and you're going out to the movies going, that's so cool, why can't I be on that? And it's easy to get into that
Oh yeah.
mentality of
Yeah.
I'm losing time not working on these great projects while I'm working on this, and it's a very normal feeling. And the idea that it's okay, take your job and just keep on learning. I feel like, I always take Conan O'Brien's sign off advice from the Tonight Show, which is don't be cynical, because that is the killer. Just don't let it make you cynical.
It's all relative,
Hmm.
like you don't realize what you have until you have some time to reflect on it and some experience to then look back.
Hmm.
But on that note, Richard, you mentioned something that made me think of this. Did you ever discover a job that you thought of but turned out? Sorry, did you ever discover a job that you hadn't thought of but turned out successful?
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, VFX editing is exactly that job that if you would have told me, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, do you want to be a VFX editor? First off, I probably would have said, I don't think so. No, probably not. And and it was purely ignorance on my part. I didn't know what the job was. I just knew I wanted to be an editor. I wanted to be an assistant editor, move into editing. That was my career path. And that was my career path based on just the assumption I had of the field. And then the first time I started learning, about tracking shots and databases, I just kind of found, oh, this is actually, I kind of enjoy this. And then, I, I I found that you work on a show that has 400 shots and you go, oh, that was a pretty complex show. And then you work on a show that has 600 and 800. And then eventually you're working on these 3,000 shot films. And it almost becomes like this, you kind of want to see how far you can push it. Like, oh, can I do this? Oh, 4,000. That's,
It feels like a challenge.
yeah, yeah.
We got this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Erica, have you had would you say the same thing about going into visual effects editing?
Yeah, definitely. That was I like kind of like what I said earlier when I got the job on Supergirl. It wasn't something I was really thinking about doing. I had been working my way up as assistant and I wanted to be an editor, and then I got that job and started doing, because I'd never just solely done the job of VFX editing before then.
Mm-hmm.
So I just found that I really, really enjoyed it, and yeah, just kind of went from there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have the same thing. Same thing to say for it as you guys do. I never really thought of VFX editing. It was the path of apprentice, assistant, editor. That was the goal. And after joining the union and learning the ropes with an assistant editor teaching me everything, and then kind of cutting my teeth as an assistant for a while, thinking this is the way to go. Worked on this film called Tonya with Margot Robbie, and that was a thing where they said, "Oh, we don't have the budget for a VFX editor, so you, as the sole assistant editor, have to take on that job." And I said, "Okay, don't even know anything about how to even manage a visual effects editor position, let alone understand how many shots we have to equal how much work we need to hire someone, So I ultimately had to take it on myself, and I'm so grateful for that chance, because that not only told me how to manage these shots, but also do comp work to like create shots from nothing, or then to manage the shots in the database. And before this job, I worked on Deepwater Horizon, which was a huge visual effects show, as a second, and I was able to work with VFX a lot, helping them because we already had two firsts. So I became kind of like the assistant that was helping VFX. And Mike Struck, who was a VFX editor on that film, who we've been working with on Mandalorian, was someone that kind of took me under his wing a little bit to help navigate that. And that's what helped me on I, Tonya, because there I was like, okay, I'm familiar enough with this to kind of say, yes, I can do it. If I didn't have any of that experience, it might have been a lot more challenging. But I'm sure he would have still navigated through it and brought it to a success. But having some of that background really said, this is actually kind of interesting. I like the data. I like kind of the organization of the database. keeping track of everything. I like creating the temp effects. I like popping in all those new versions, seeing it all take place and how they change and form into new ideas and new concepts. Um, and yeah, that's where like you didn't think that it was going to be your bread and butter, but you know what? It kind of is. And now I know Rich and I have talked about it. Like, I don't know, Erica, how you feel, but a lot of ways as I've continued on as visual effects editor, the more the goal of editor has waned.
Yeah,
You
it
know,
kind of
like,
has for me too. Yeah.
yeah, like that idea is, while I still love the idea of it, I feel like this is a whole different world that is connecting a lot of the things I loved as a kid, which was making visual effects and special effects and the art of
Hmm.
it and the design of it, and as well with storytelling. But this is a whole other area, and you know what? There's a lot of stress that comes with being an editor that I'm not sure if I really want. I enjoy cutting, but you know, maybe that's more of I do it on my downtime instead.
But you touch on a really good point too for for those who are unaware, in the sense of being a career first assistant editor or a career VFX editor is one of those things where it's, I think oftentimes people hear the word assistant in a title and think, oh, well, that's just a low paying, well, that's just a stepping stone. But a first assistant, especially to a high level editor, is often a very lucrative job, often
Hmm.
pays very well, and it certainly has its stress, but it's a valid and honorable career, that I think earlier on, at least in my career, I don't want to be a lowly assistant. And you go, no, that is a critical job, and a good first is worth their weight in gold, as most
Hmm.
editors will attest to. And likewise, VFX editing, just the amount of shows that have increasingly complex VFX editing, there's something to be said about. It's great that it is an in demand job, and if you love it, there's a wonderful place for you.
It's definitely a career path for those interested in that
Oh yeah.
work. You know, back in New York, I that was the same thing, Rich. I saw everybody was moving up to editor in some capacity, whether it was in television or features, or they were an assistant and they're on the side. They were cutting low budget films to eventually move up to editor. But that was the path, and it did feel like, I there's no way to have a career as a first. That doesn't seem well, because I wasn't seeing that. You know, I wasn't really. I think I can count it like on my hand, one or two people back in New York, that three people like that were. Oh, I've always seen them as a first. But from all the people I knew that were moving up like me, no one thought of, I'm going to be a career first. You know, and it wasn't until I came out here to LA that I started to like really understand that on bigger films with assistants who have been doing this for a long time, and they're fantastic at that job. You know, they know exactly what to do. That is the difference between like, oh, this I'm good at it, I'm going to stick with it, and I can run the room. Come to me, I have the answers. I can run this thing. So that's definitely an option as a career as well, not just having to go climb that ladder. So, like on that, do you guys have any mentors that stick out to you that helped you out through your career?
Well, for me, definitely Dana,
Yeah.
I would say, because she really took me under her wing and helped teach me a lot and helped propel me forward. So definitely her. But I've also honestly, I think, because that was my first real experience on a film, I've kind of just tried to let everyone that I work for be a mentor as much as I can, because I just think there's so much to learn, and people who have been in this industry for a long time really have a lot to teach you, especially if you're new. So
Very diplomatic of you.
yeah, well, but it's true. I mean, but I think
Everyone's a
it's,
mentor.
but I think it, but well, I mean, some people maybe don't want to be, so not everyone,
Yeah, yeah.
but I think it's important to have the mentality of, as like an individual, of always wanting to learn, because you're never at the top of your game, really. I think there's always something
Oh,
new to learn,
yeah.
and I think if you want to really advance in your career, having that kind of mentality is really
Like
helpful.
humility.
Exactly.
You know,
Sure.
like maybe I have more to learn, and I'm not at, there, like, as if there's always something more to learn, in any capacity, whether it's technical or
Yeah.
political or, interactions with people, things like that.
Well, and
Rich,
especially, oh, sorry.
no,
I was
go
just
ahead.
going to say, especially
Yeah.
in visual effects and even in editorial, it's such a technical field. There literally is always something new to learn, too.
Yeah. Yeah. That is true, that no matter how much you learn, you're still going to be behind because there's something new
Hmm.
coming out. You know, that's always going to be the case.
Well, and there's a sense too of there's something valuable about working with different people because we do effectively the same thing on every film, but it's so valuable to see how other people do the same things we do because touching on the aspect of humility, there's something so humbling about when someone just goes, "Here's how I do it," and you go, "Oh my gosh, everything about how I used to do this doesn't make sense anymore. This
Oh
is
yeah.
this is
Oh,
a,"
yeah.
and I'm always reticent to say the right way. It's one of my least favorite phrases, but there's certainly better ways of working, and it all varies by context. But likewise for me, I can't point to one single mentor, but there's very specific people that really took time with me that I'm always grateful for. I mean, the first editor who hired me on UFO Hunters, Jeff Tober, he was a supervising editor who I was interested in learning the tape decks. People would look at Digibeta decks and they'd look at, we were using D5 HD, and most people would look at it and go, "I don't want to touch that." I'd be like, "I want to learn that thing." And so that was really exciting. And then editors like Lawrence Jordan, I worked with him on actually my second feature that I ever worked on when I was just getting my feet in that field. We put together our business master the workflow, just kind of a kindred spirit in terms of wanting to give back to the community. And just there's been a lot of editors who I find what I tend to learn most from editors, more so than even creative decision making, is how to deal with people, because I think that's one of the biggest talents the editors have, is dealing with people, whether it's dealing with difficult people, because there is more than the fair share of difficult people in our field, but also just not even necessarily difficult, but everyone has a different way of hearing feedback and taking notes. And sometimes the way you make your case to someone about, when you're fighting for a decision that you want to keep in the show, there's different ways of approaching that. And the interpersonal aspect of the job is so critical that I always find if an editor lets me in the room, I'm always interested to see how they interact with their director and with their producer, particularly when they don't agree. That's
Hmm.
one of those things. That's a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, you usually touched on something there, Rich. Like the mentors out, and I would agree with you. The mentors that I think of for myself are the ones that I learned how to navigate the room and how they navigate their job in terms of their balance, or how they speak to people. It isn't just they were really smart at the craft, and that's what I would call a mentor. Yes, that's great. You're learning a lot. But from Ian Bloom, my the assistant editor who got me my first internship, anytime I see him, we joke that he discovered me. He's like, I found him. But someone who was continually being able to easily able to reach out to, and thus maybe help get you a job down the line, as if keep up that connection with just, hey, how you been, in an email, or let's grab a coffee, let's just catch up. How's your family? It's more than just, can you get me a job? It's what's going on in your life, because this is a relationship. All these things that we all the people that we work with, it's relationships. We work in these rooms, we see each other more than we see our families, during the week. So there is that connection to build on those relationships. Another editor that I've worked with that was a big mentor for me was his name is Jamie Kirkpatrick. He works in New York as an editor, and he does a lot of smaller films, but continually working as an editor. And he got me my first kind of bigger assistant editor role, where I was like running the room. And from him, it was this mentality of he had kids, and he was saying, no, we're done, 6, I gotta leave, or 7, no, take off, I don't need you, you know and helping me navigate, giving me an opportunity to edit, when he had to leave for a week, and I had, but the director still needed to kind of get some work done with his cut. I stepped in, and I had the chance that my editor trusted me with the director to kind of sit in and like make some trims here and there. And that same editor ultimately helped me get my first editing credit, on a film that I assisted for him. He had to leave. He had another job lined up, and I was right there to move into the editing chair, and cut my first feature, kind of like in together with him. But he had to leave, but then I was taking over. And but still, it's that same kind of like, I respect the respect, equal respect, from your mentor. Like, they respect you as much as you respect them, and they respect your time, and they respect your work, and your what you provide them as an editor, as well as like the feel and the vibe in the room. Like, I like working with you, so I help you, you help me, and it kind of goes that way. And that's a big thing about being a good mentor, you know. So did there ever a point where you had to make a choice to steer your career in a particular direction? I feel like we've kind of answered this one, but like in terms of how we've kind of decided, like when we realized like maybe VFX editing was more of the uh, role that we wanted to take. Did you ever like turn down work, or yeah. Did you ever like turn down a job that you were offered because you really didn't want to go down that road?
I ended up leaving a job for a better opportunity that I think really was a huge turning point in my career. I mentioned earlier that I worked on Supergirl, and when I was on that, there was another VFX AE who I am now like really close friends with. We got along really well, and she had been working on the previous few seasons of Game of Thrones. So she ended up leaving early to go back to that, and after she left, contacted me and was like, "Hey, things are starting to get really crazy over here." They were getting into season 6, which is when the visual effects on that show started to really ramp up. And she was like, I really liked the work you did on Supergirl. We get along. We'd really love to have you over here. And I had never quit a job before in the middle. Like, Supergirl went for the rest of the season, and this was probably like November, December. So I was going to have to leave early, which I was kind of, put me in some turmoil at the time, but I ended up leaving and going over there. And I think it was a really good decision for my career. And I ended up learning so much, and still have worked with people from that team ever since.
How was it navigating that? Like, I want to leave this job. I've had that experience too, where like you don't want to burn bridges, but you also know this is a better
Exactly.
opportunity. How did you handle that? You said it was a little turmoil. Can you dive into that a bit more?
It was more my own internal turmoil than really anything there. I mean, they were upset
Yeah.
that I wanted to leave, but I did my best to make sure I gave them like a 4 weeks notice. I gave them as much time as possible. I helped train the person that came after me, so I tried to
Yep.
make it as
Yep.
smooth of a transition as possible, but it's still one of those things. It's just I hate letting people down, I guess.
I think we all do. I think we all have that feeling of like, I know that we're ingrained, I think, in this industry to say you're going to stay on this till the end. Kind of like you got to stick through it. But when there's better opportunities come up, how do I kind of do want to leave, and I always said, I knew someone once that they quit the job. I replaced somebody back in my accounting days. I replaced somebody, and they, just moved laterally. It wasn't a step up, it was just laterally, because maybe that job had more duration to finish than this one. And that kind of thing just doesn't sound so great. But whenever it's for a better position, more money, it's more fulfilling. And then people around you can understand that and kind of root for you. Say, yeah, you know what? That makes more sense for you. Good luck. And then, like you said, I'm going to do what I got to do to help bring the new person in. I've done that where I quit and I had to make a whole like spreadsheet, work Google Doc of this is exactly how I do my job. So the new person doesn't have to do anything but follow steps 1 through 100.
I did all that. Yeah.
Yeah. I worked as a second on a film where it wasn't really going so great for me. I felt like it was a job I took because it was there, but really I had already done a couple VFX editing gigs. But then I had already done season 1 of Happy, and then I worked on a film, and then during that season 2 was coming up, and I had to think about, they wanted me back, but I wasn't sure if again, do I still want to be an editor, or do I want to be VFX? What do I want to do? And then it kind of worked out in my favor that the answer became more clear, that going into VFX again, diving back into that world is my best opportunity. And that I had this, they're going to hate me. They're going to like think I'm failing, and that's not what you do, and those things. And then once I told them, they were like, "Oh, this is great. Good for you. Congratulations." I'm like, "Oh, I thought you'd be upset that I'm leaving you high and dry." "Oh no, you're happy. Okay, great. So then we're cool. Great." And then, that thing of like, if you've always just let people know, and they knew my strengths was in VFX as well. So when you let people know in advance where you want to be, that also helps when you leave. And that was the same thing in accounting. I left an accounting gig I think on a like a Tuesday. I gave them like 3 days notice to leave on a Friday, like for a post PA job. Same thing. They were like, "Oh, well, we know that you sucks for us, but we know you always wanted to be in editing, so happy for you," you know. And sorry, but in that example, they wanted me to move up to a second assistant accountant, working with petty cash, because they knew I was good with, again, the database, the numbers, the data entry. I'm like quick and fast, and they wanted me to move up, and I'm like, I don't want to move up here, because you don't want to be too good at something you don't really enjoy, because you can get stuck in that. I see a lot of people, even outside of the industry, get stuck in this place of doing something they don't really love, but they're good at it. So I knew those are some examples where, like, no, I gotta go this way, and I'm glad I did.
Well, and it's encouraging too to hear both of you talking about how when the person you brought this up to was happy that you were happy and going on to something that was going to make you happier. It does feel like a betrayal. For me, a similar thing happened to me when I was working my way in scripted television and just wasn't making enough connections in features. So at that point I decided, well, I guess features are just not in the cards for me. I'm not going to make any relationships there, and so my career won't go there. And right around that time, I was working for a company through some old work colleagues. They hired me on a job that they probably didn't even necessarily need me for, but I needed work, so they gave it to me. So it was a very generous thing of them anyway. And I got an opportunity to work on a feature. And it was, kind of how you were talking about taking a lateral job. This was actually a pretty significant pay cut. It was a very low budget feature. So I was going to make about half of my normal rate on this feature that I was making on television. And so, like, trying to explain, like, oh, is it a much better paying job? Actually, it's a significantly worse paying job. But it's a feature. It was union. It was a feature, and it was like, I was like, and it was a similar thing where I could tell I could tell they were upset that they were losing me, but they just said, "Is that what you want?" And I said, "Yeah." And they're like, "Okay." And like you say, I said, I will call all of my friends. I will line up some replacements, and when you need a phone call to get you through this, I'll pick up. I'm not going to leave you high and dry. And it's kind of amazing how I think most people are in that situation where they're like, look, if that big job comes up, you just you do kind of need to take it. There are better ways to deal with that exit, but
I mean, the truth is, people come and go all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, jobs don't always line up perfectly. And I've seen some great people leave jobs that, still can continue to work, and it's not a problem. And there's a big difference between quitting and leaving people high and dry versus planning it out, planning your exit, preparing for someone else to take over and guiding them. Even after you've left the job, you're gonna have to take some phone calls and emails to, like, have the transition be smooth. There's a big difference there. I think mentally it's hard to comprehend that when you are thinking about leaving a job, because in my head I thought that, oh, I'm quitting and they're gonna hate me and I'm gonna leave people high and dry. But in reality, you're not. You're gonna, you're good at your job, so you're gonna have that smooth transition. So on that note, did you guys ever have like a job that you actively pursued? Like, if you heard about a movie coming out that you wanted to be a part of, did you ever actively pursue a job, or have you always kind of taken what's come?
I've only done that once, and it was well, I take that back. I've actually done that twice, but was surprised to be successful at it once. In that, and it was a job that was a bit of a dream job. Someone told me they were looking for someone, but what ended up happening was the information I was given was wrong. The contact they gave me was at the complete wrong studio. I didn't even know what studio was producing the film. So I called the phone number, and I was waiting for them to say, oh, hey, we're looking for someone for this film. And they didn't mention it. And then at the end of the conversation, I said, hey, so I heard you guys are ramping up on this film. They're like, oh, that's not us. And so I had this like kind of heart dropping moment of, okay, well, this isn't to be. And I despaired for about a day, and I just said, I'm in the position right now where I know they need someone. So I need to find out what I can do to get my way to that team. And so what I did was I was following their IMDb page every day to see if they would list the editor and the first assistant. They didn't. And so I just gave it time. And about a week and a half later, they updated it and they did list the editor and the first assistant. And so I checked my list of Facebook friends and said, do I know anybody who is 1 degree away from them? But not just that, because I didn't want just anybody I'd met on Facebook. I said, do I know someone on Facebook who I'm willing to call in a favor? And, one thing I'm really big on is, and I've had people do this before, even if well-intentioned, I don't like it when people lie for me. Like if I know someone socially and they give me a recommendation, they say, oh, Richard's great. I've actually had this in an interview once where they said, oh, this guy said you're great. And I was like, I haven't worked with them. And so, I found a friend who I had known well enough to say, would you just make an introduction? Don't, I just want to meet this person. I heard they were looking, they're probably staffed up. And I reached out, and my friend she was very gracious and made an introduction. And I met this person, and I tried to keep it very casual because, again, I didn't want to make it about getting a job from them, even though, I mean, that is the impetus of it. But I wanted it to be just casual. And so my friend made an introduction, and I got no response. So I waited another day and no response. So I said, I'm just going to reach out just to say, you know what? It was great meeting you. Sounds like you're really busy. And you know what? I bet you already have someone because you've been doing this a long time. You have your team. I'm super excited for the film. And they reached out to me the next day and said, we're so busy we didn't have a chance to check our email. We actually still need someone. Do you want to come in and meet us? And it was like, yes, I do. And then the challenge becomes, you go, okay, now I don't want to just like show my hand and go, oh my God, it's the coolest thing in the world, even though it was.
Yeah, whatever, no big deal, sure.
Yeah, but
just totally reverse psychologied them.
I mean, but it filled me with this sense of like, you can pursue that show you want. I mean, obviously it comes once you have a certain amount of colleagues. But again, being a business of relationships, it is all about, having friends that we all call in favors with each other. And I have my list of friends who, you call me, you need something, I'll do what I can. I want to help. I want to help the people I care about, because that is the community. And all that to say is, yeah, it's I'd like to think that fortune favors the bold. Don't be too bold, because you don't want to come off as arrogant. But I don't know, that's a lesson that I would say is there's nothing wrong in being, in being forward. But again, don't overdo it.
Yeah, right. Don't be too forward.
Don't be too forward. I've seen these people who are too forward, and then it's a bit off-putting, and then you don't want to bring them on. But what you did there was you said, I want to just meet you and have some lunch and just kind of say hi, and I think what you're doing is cool. That's like a really great way to get your foot in the door, rather than saying I'm asking for anything. And I've had my share of like, I'm just, here's my list of people I got to email looking for work. How many times did that ever work for me? Like rarely, right? But when you say, hey, let's meet up for lunch, let's meet up for a coffee, let's meet for a drink, it's building that relationship. So, that's all to say that to wrap this all up, it feels like all of our little stories are all about kind of more about how we navigated relationships with the people in our industry to help us get where we are, and I think that's pretty great. You guys have anything else to add as we wrap up?
Just to reemphasize that is I do feel I am a product of everyone that's helped me, which is why I feel the need to help as many people as possible, because that's how we get through this.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about relationships, really, and just being known as a reliable person and being able to help other people, and
Mm-hmm.
they can help you, you can help them, and
I think they call
that's how you
that
get ahead.
synergy.
Synergy, yeah, that's the word. Sure.
Yeah. Cool. This has been great, guys. Thanks, well, not thanking you. You're a part of it's like I'm thanking you for being on the podcast
You're
that you're already on.
You can thank us. It's fine.
Hey, guys. Thanks for being on the Render Bar today. Then you thank me. Thank me.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Steve.
Steve.
Hey, you're welcome, guys. Hey, thanks for listening and watching wherever you get your fine podcasts. We will see you next time.